on this as well. I think it's complicated. I mean, for me, just me being me, I assume a lot of it has to do with bias, with homophobia, transphobia, what have you. If you don't ask, you don't have to think about it. And if you don't like those people to begin with, then it's very easy to not ask questions. And so, yeah, I do think that that's a big factor. James mentioned that one of the sources that we do have data on is young people. So, for example, the Minnesota Student Survey. But that's great. But anytime you start asking youth about sexual orientation in particular, oh my God, you're trying to recruit the kids. That's the whole thing, and it's just BS. And it's the same BS that's been going on for decades. So there's that piece. I have run into in the older adult context. One is the sense that there aren't old gay people, and it turns out that there are. Two, we don't want to even have a conversation about old people and sex. So there's that. And then the reality is, and I feel like I might be stepping a little bit on Barbara's turf here, is that many older adults and grew up in an era very different from our own, where their default, everything was ranged against them, and their default setting was to absolutely hide, deny, keep it a secret, so on and so forth. In our older adult survey, we looked at older adults as being 50 plus, and between about 50 and around 75 or so, the vast majority of people were already out. 70% or so people were out. Once you get past about 75, age 75, that number dropped down to about 9% of people who were out. And that's just, I think, a lot of it having to do with when and where they grew up. I have talked with administrators in like nursing homes, that kind of facility, where they are very proud of the fact that they would never ask about sexual orientation or gender identity among their residents, because that would be really private information, and it would make them feel vulnerable and expose them to whatever it is, and traumatize them. And so they're very proud about not asking that question. And so then, of course, so how do you know you have them? Well, it's so there are complexities to it that I don't know that has to do with bias, but in my sense, a lot of it is to do with just simply bias.
No, I would agree with Phil. And I also think like Phil was saying, there is this kind of like notion that like being gay, being queer, being trans is a new trend that just so happened to like come out of like the 90s and early aughts. But we also know that we lost a huge population of people in the 80s. And so that's a huge demographic of folks that we unfortunately lost because of the inaction of like the government. So then you still will not sometimes tell the truth on those surveys. So we're still not getting a super accurate representation of, how many queer youth we have in the country. I had to take a survey like that when I was in high school, and I wasn't out, and I was like, I am definitely straight. And that was not true. So, and then we lose again a lot of data between like after college up until 50, because who is collecting data for those folks? So, and another thing that we saw when they were trying to, lessen the survey to take out anything that has to do with gender or sexual orientation, just this notion that if you just ask people if they're gay, it's going to like click a light bulb, and then all of a sudden they're going to be gay because you asked the question. And so, which is a wild concept. But yeah, I don't know. We just don't have enough data collection. And I think it, again, like Phil said, has to do with a lot of biases and preconceived notions.
Barbara, do you want to add anything to that question?
No, I agree. When we were trying to get information to sort of make the case for our senior housing project to developers, we did surveys at Pride and some other LGBT locations, and it was very difficult to get people to sort of own their identities. on their orientations publicly. And again, we were particularly going for an older audience, which, you know, basically had grown up learning to protect themselves from opening up their who they really are. But it was fascinating when we did get that information, how many of them were so not interested in going into senior housing with other LGBT people. They were so comfortable as being out as gay people in their own neighborhood, their own area. They had sort of built a life for themselves, where they loved being a queer person in the Powderhorn neighborhood or whatever that area they may be in. So it's sort of split 50-50 between the survey takers. About 50% of them were really excited about having a place that they could call home that was also other people of their age, and also other people of sexual orientation and gender identity. But many of them were very, very happy in their neighborhoods and didn't want the isolation as they thought about it.